It's time to step into the Coming Out Lounge, a cool, safe space to be true to your sexual self. With your host, Rick Clemens. Rick has helped hundreds of people come out of the closet, and now each week he's bringing you cool insights for loving and accepting yourself, boosting your self-confidence, and living a guilt-free, purpose-filled life on the other side of the closet doors. Cuddle up with yourself and get ready for heartwarming coming out stories, ideas for living authentically, and tips for being fully self-expressed. Now here's your host, Coming Out Coach Rick.
Hello, Closet Busters. It's time once again to stop the closet dwelling and to step out, step up, and step into living your powerful truth. And what if that powerful truth is you kind of love a lot of different people? Or maybe you find yourself attracted to other people and it goes just beyond bromance or little crushes. What if it's actually what we're now being heard in society called polyamory? And a lot of people question, is this like a new sexual revolution? Is it a fad? Is it a revolt against all societal norms? Or maybe it's even a slap to the heteronormative. But what if it's simply a way of being in relationship with yourself and others? Now, depending on who you talk to, the answer could be yes, no, or all of the above. But what I believe the real answer is polyamory is the practice of really being in desire of and wanting a relationship that involves more than two people. And the thing is those two people know and consent, and everyone involved knows about what's going on. Now, some of you may be sitting there scratching your head going, well, wait, how is this different than polygamy? Well, it might fall into that realm, but here's where things are a little bit different. This is where you kind of cross over the sexual orientation boundaries and you go beyond gay, straight, bisexual, transgender, and you discover something different, because you see the truth is polyamory covers a lot of different various forms of being in multiple relationships or forms of sexual and romantic relationships. And some of them involve sex, some of them just involve the emotional exclusivity between two people. In fact, people who identify as polyamorous typically reject the view that sexual and relational, I guess what you'd call it, exclusivity, so to speak, are necessary for a deep, committed, long-term, loving relationship. Now, this is the first time I've brought anybody on the show to really talk in depth about this kind of relationship, and I found a guy through some friends of mine who seems to really get this. He writes a lot about it. He's going to help us sort out this kind of groundbreaking way of being sexually and emotionally involved with another human. He's a Portland resident. He's a polyamory blogger at multi.love. And I want to welcome to the podcast a brilliant guy by the name of Saul of Hearts. Welcome to the podcast, Saul.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Hey, I'm glad to have you here. We've been working on this for a little while, and I thought, this would be a really cool conversation to have, and I think this one is actually going to be episode 75, so we're going to kind of hit a milestone with this episode when it airs. So I'm really excited to be doing something a little bit different. So you yourself write and talk about this a whole lot, so I kind of set it up, but I'd love to hear from someone who's kind of in the trenches with this. What is polyamory really all about from your perspective?
Sure. Well, I really liked your intro. I think you did a great job of getting at the many different facets of polyamory. I think that it's something that functions very differently for different people. Some people, just happen to, meet two people that they love, and then those three people form a, closed, committed relationship. Other times it may be a couple who decides that they want to, date other people who add something to their lives and their relationships. It really can vary. And then you also have people who may identify as solo poly and are, living on their own, but have partners whom they have intimate relationships with, some of which may be sexual, some of which may be more platonic. There's just such a diversity of ways that people approach the topic that it's been great lately to see more press and more media representations of how this actually works for people in their lives.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And just ironically, my husband and I happen to be watching shows we had recorded that we never get around to. And we kind of like, okay, well, I guess we'll finally watch this. And we'd watched everything else we wanted to watch. And we brought up an episode of Elementary. And the episode that we watched actually had a plot line where there was a triad relationship, 2 men and a woman. And I thought, this is really interesting that I'm watching this the night before that I know I'm going to be talking to Saul about a polyamorous relationship. And I think a lot of the assumption that gets made, and you can probably comment on this better than I can, is everybody makes the assumption, oh, this is just about being free and sexual and swingers and all that. That's so not true, isn't it?
Right. I mean, there's definitely, people approach it in different ways. And, for some people it is more about, the sexual adventure. But I think for a lot of people, it's really about the emotional connection. And it's about being able to, if you meet someone new and you have this, this deep connection with them, I think if you're in a traditional relationship, you don't really know how far you can, grow that side relationship. You don't know if you can, be affectionate or cuddle or, have a sexual experience with this new person. And I think with, polyamory, there's an ability to let each relationship kind of, arrive at its own balance. And that's kind of how I approach it, is not necessarily, can I, go out and, date all these, different people. It's more just allowing each connection to, take its own course and not necessarily be defined by, the structure of a traditional relationship.
What strikes me as you were talking is I had this interesting thought about friendships. And it's like, okay, so do we actually sit down and go, okay, so I'm going to have this friendship and this friendship's going to fulfill this need in my life. And that's all that friendship's for. I don't think most of us go into friendships that way. I think we kind of step into a friendship going, wow, this feels really good. I'm enjoying being with this person and I enjoy the things we get to do. And before we know it, there's something there. And I think that's part of what I'm hearing kind of underneath the covers here, so to speak, and yet not really even hiding what you're saying. It's you kind of step into these relationships with, okay, let's kind of see what transpires here. Some of this may be actual attractions, but you also kind of seem like it's open to wherever it will go.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely how I approach it, and it's how a lot of people that I know look at it as well.
Yeah. So, given where we are in our evolution as a species and a planet and, everything, do you think this is like the next evolution of, intimacy and sexuality? Are we starting to press this envelope, or has this been around for many, many years and it just wasn't talked about?
I think it's a bit of both. I think that we're definitely seeing more people willing to talk about it and willing to share their stories. I think we're going to see a lot more interest in it. Even dating sites these days are, recognizing that this is a way that people, pursue relationships. Just a few weeks ago, OkCupid announced that they were going to have an option for couples to link their profiles and date as a pair. So, I think we are seeing a shift in awareness and openness about it. But at the same time, I think that, I don't think it's going to take the place of monogamous relationships. I think there are a lot of people who prefer that and are happy with that. And I totally support people who, for whom, that works for them. I do think that, if you do look back at, writers from, the past few centuries, I think you can definitely find examples of people who, pursue these kinds of relationships. But I think it's becoming easier. It's becoming more socially acceptable. And, I definitely think that trend is going to continue.
Yeah, I do too. And I think what I found is I've been doing some research around this, and this is starting to show up in my world sometimes when I am working with people in our gay community or people who are just coming out. I think it's different than like the quote sexual revolution sort of discussion. It's kind of like, okay, this is kind of grew out of possibly the sexual revolution. It was kind of like there and free love and all this stuff, but this is more like, okay, so let's just put this on the the rainbow of sexuality and see where it lands for people and how it works for people. And I'm finding it really fascinating to start having conversations. To your point of, if somebody wants to be monogamous, I just, before we got on to record this, I had just been with a potential new client, and he said, yeah, I really prefer to be a monogamous person, and I guess that's okay. That's what works for me. And of course I immediately said, why are you apologizing for that? This is who you are, and it's interesting to me that we as a society have almost inherently put a apology-centric state of being on who we are as people, especially when it comes to the framework of sex and sexuality and relationships. Do you find that to be pretty much what you see too? Is it seems like everybody's always apologizing for, oh, I'm this or I'm that.
Sure, yeah, and I definitely think that, even just these past 5 years, I've seen a lot of changes in my own social group. And, when I first started, exploring these ideas, I felt like I was, totally, venturing into territory that wasn't okay, and that wasn't, that I thought my friends were going to, laugh or, judge me for it. And, now I'm at the point where some of those very same friends are now coming to me and saying, oh, hey, remember that conversation we had about polyamory 5 years ago? I'm trying that out myself now. So yeah, I definitely think that there is, I think there is always an uncertainty and a discomfort when you're, you're unsure when you take the leap into something like this. If you're going to, find people, open to dating the way you want to date and that. But yeah, I definitely think where, we are getting to a point where people are just, ready to move past the apology stage, right, and ready to just accept that this is how a lot of us are living our lives. Well,
I know in the, if there is such a thing as the typical coming out conversations, the apology comes out of guilt and shame. So as you were talking, I'm hearing a little bit of that in your own, how you came to be comfortable in your own skin around this is, oh, wow, somebody's going to think I'm weird or something. So there must have been some guilt and shame you kind of carried when you first started discovering this about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I was raised in a pretty traditional, family and community, and everyone that I knew was in a married monogamous relationship. That was just the role models that were in my life. All the adults were, traditionally married. So I definitely assumed that was, where my life path was heading. So yeah, it was definitely a very gradual adjustment. It definitely took a few years to fully, get to the point where I, changed over my, online dating profiles to reflect my new, perspective. And yeah, it was definitely I definitely needed to meet people who were already doing this. I think that was a really big thing, was seeing people in my own life who I could look to as role models, and not just this theoretical thing that I could read about and, see on TV sometimes.
But what you just brought up, Saul, is really interesting, because you said you needed to see people who could be role models. You need to be around people. This is where the parallel of the coming out process starts to become the human condition, until we were able to see, the role models of the Will and Grace and the Ellen DeGenereses and those kind of things, without it being like the Jack Trippers from, Three's Company years ago. And I don't know how old you are, so that may have been like, what the hell is that? But, it's such an evolution of, oh my gosh, now that we can see this, I'm not the only one. And so this polyamory is kind of growing into that same stage now where, okay, now this is starting to be talked about. There's starting to be articles on a regular basis in some of the major publications. This is becoming a discussion that says, okay, this is what is in the world, but I'm curious, do you feel like this is something that you chose, or this is just something that kind of blossomed from who you've always been?
I definitely think it's something that has always been there. I don't think I had any way to conceptualize it in my life. I think that was the tricky part. But I mean, thinking back, even when I was growing up, I never really, understood the, traditional, marriage route. I never, I kind of always sort of had alternative ideas of, like, maybe I'd marry someone, but we'd, have this sort of like open marriage kind of thing going on. Like, I definitely had those ideas from a very early age,
Right.
but I had no idea how to, I had no idea that there were, frameworks already in place that I could learn from. So it seemed like something that was just, so out there that I could never actually, act on it. But, seeing, more people who have managed this successfly,
Right.
definitely gave me hope that I could integrate that into my life.
But I think there is a little bit interesting, and I hate to use the terminology sexual revolution, but I would almost rather say a sexual evolution and awakening that's happening. One of my good friends, Joe Court, who wrote the book Is My Husband Gay, Straight or Bi? He's just been posting lately, and then I found some stuff on Huffington Post in the last day or so about this new app that's out there for men who are looking to have sex with men, even though they don't identify as being gay. And the app is called Bro. And it's about having dates with guys and going out as guys. And it kind of goes beyond the, let's go have some beers. It's like, I want to connect. I want to be, intimately connected to you. And it may be a sexual thing. It may not be a sexual thing. But this starts to speak to the polyamory world, where giving ourselves permission to say, I love someone, but I can also love someone else at a different level. And it may just be an emotional connection. It may be a sexual connection. It may be both of those things. I think this is where we're waking up to, what are we going to finally give ourselves permission to be in the human evolution?
Sure, yeah, and I definitely think that's a big component of it. The people who I've encountered who are polyamorous tend to be a lot more, flexible around notions of sexual orientation. There's a lot less homophobia in the poly community. So yeah, and for me, certainly, identifying as poly allowed me to be a lot more open-minded about the kinds of connections I was open to with guys. So yeah, I definitely think that there's a lot of overlap between.
So I'm curious, in the poly world, and the only reason I'm bringing this up is partially because I don't know, but I've seen glimpses of this. So I would assume there's like different subsets where there may be, you as a male are maybe more polyamorous and prefer to be with two females, or you may prefer to be with a guy and another woman. Is there different subsets that are kind of like the patterns within the community?
There are definitely different subsets. I wouldn't say that they break down, in terms of orientation in that way, but I've been to, for example, like, one kind of event that I've been to is a cuddle party, and those tend to be places where people can just share non-sexual physical affection, and in those kinds of environments, men are encouraged to be affectionate. So I think that there's just kind of an openness and acceptance around welcoming people of different orientations. I don't go to poly events that are specifically for specific genders or orientations, but there's definitely a lot less awkwardness just even talking about sex and sexual experiences with with other guys who show up. You don't really have to put on that kind of put up the walls that that a lot of guys do,
right?
When it comes to sharing those experiences.
Exactly. So I don't want to, unless you feel like sharing it, I don't want to like put you on the spot here, but kind of give us an age range. What's your age range that you fall into?
That I fall into? I mean, I'm in my late 20s. Okay. And going to the kinds of events that I've been to have been I think we are starting to see a lot of people in their 20s learning about this at an earlier age. I think in the past you definitely saw more 30s and 40s kind of demographics, but here in Portland at least there's a lot of just discussion groups and sort of events at bars, meetups where that are targeted toward, poly people in their 20s and 30s.
Yeah. So the reason I wanted to go there is because there's a lot of people saying, oh, this is just a young person's thing. And I tend to disagree. I think that this is multi-generational thing, but we haven't, just like coming out to be gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, we were never given the permission to be expressed in this way. So I think what I'm seeing is the younger generation, and I've got two daughters, I've got a 20-year-old and a 17-year-old, their purview of this sort of stuff is completely different than when I was being raised. They kind of see things as, well, you love who you love, and it doesn't necessarily have to be sex, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be intimate. It can be, man, I just want to hang with this person. Do you see this being more the thrust in the younger generation now, or is this something that carries over to the 20, 30, 40 somethings? Is it different from generation to generation?
Yeah, I do think that. A lot of the folks who are in their 30s and 40s tend to be more couples who are learning about this now and are in the process of like opening up their marriage or relationship, whereas I think a lot of the younger generations are starting from the point of jumping into this before marriage. Mm-hmm. And so I think that on the one hand, I think that's really great, and I think we're seeing a lot more openness to different relationship styles. I also think sometimes that can make things a little bit difficult, when you are dating, and there's a little bit more vagueness when you don't have that, what they call the relationship escalator to date, marry, move in together, and all that stuff. I think there's a lot more flexibility, so I think it's more important to be clear on what it is that you're looking for in a particular relationship, and be very clear about your expectations and your boundaries.
Right. I'm glad you brought up the relationship escalator. I've never quite heard it in that terminology, but it's always been something I've thought about is, we put these expectations. In fact, again, I'm going to go back to the client I was just talking to where, he's been out for 3-4 years at this point and was married to a woman for 15 years. But he seems to be on this like, okay, so now I'm an out gay man, so now, it's time to go, find the monogamous relationship and get right back into it. And I couldn't help, sitting there wondering, okay, but what if you didn't feel like that's what you had to do? What if you were able to just relax and explore? And I don't, and he was very adamant that he doesn't really want to be the hookup guy. And I totally honored him for that and said, this isn't me as a coach judging this. This is, I'm trying to help you open up to what is it you're trying to achieve and where you want to go. But I just can't help but take what you just said and think, if we were more on a track of allowing people to evolve and explore without the pressures of what we believe, get married, have children, have this kind of job, da-da-da-da-da, how might the planet shift by allowing people to just be? Is that,
yeah.
I think that's a big basis of where this polyamory could contribute to a much more healed planet where, if I said, you and I have never, for the audience, Saul and I have never met in person. We've talked on the phone a couple of times, but, if I were to just say, man, after being with you on this podcast and, just really enjoying the conversation, I think I could see myself really, having a bromance with you and nothing kinky, just, hey, we really connected. I think a lot of people go, well, how can you do that? But I think if we would calm down and just start to accept people where they are and as they are, it would be a whole different way of being in the world.
That's definitely, a big part of it for me. And, at the same time, I don't want to, describe polyamory as some kind of cure-all. I think that, there's still, I think there are difficulties no matter what relationship style you end up in.
So what is some of the challenges of being in a polyamorous relationship?
Well, for me, the challenges have related mostly to, and this may be more specific to my, kind of my life and my generation, but because I haven't really been sure where I was going to live and, settle down long term, it's been hard to know how to progress, relationships. It's definitely tricky. I've always liked the idea of having partners in different places. I've liked the idea of being able to, to know that if I visit a certain place, there's someone who I really, care about and want to spend time with there. And that definitely gets tricky as as time goes by, and if especially if there's gaps between the time that you can see someone, I think it's easy for expectations to shift a bit. And I'm really not big on virtual connections. So for me, I tend to focus on people who are where I am at the moment. So it's a bit harder for me to keep in touch and maintain long distance connections. So I think that's one of the challenges that I face is, on the one hand, there's so many ways to connect with people, in other places, and I don't want to shut myself off to those connections. If there's someone who is a really great fit and they happen to live further away, I want to be open to that, but I also need to be realistic about, how much I can invest in something long distance like that.
The long distance piece to this is something that I think a lot of people contend with, and then they don't see how that's inhibiting to their own personal well-being and their growth as a person to be able to be realistic. A couple of nights ago, I was working with a client who happens to live in the Philippines, and his girlfriend is in London, and she won't be returning back to the Philippines till 2017. And we were really working on his trust issues. And I just finally had to say to him, okay, but let's put fact in place. She's not coming back to the Philippines until 2017, which means you say you're not going to London till then either. So what is this piece of trust that needs to get settled? Because that's a very long time to realistically believe you could keep this kind of relationship alive and well and going and be healthy in yourself if trust is going to be at the root of what's causing all the problems. And what I just heard you say is, it's a matter of coming to terms with, okay, let's be realistic within myself, what I can really do. And it sounds like that's what's working for you.
Sure. It's definitely, for me, it really is about, I wouldn't want to shut myself off to new connections in one place, because, I don't think that cheapens or, takes away from a connection that I may have with someone else whom I don't see as frequently. I think that, they're all of the connections that I have are important, and, it's more about what works in your particular situation. Maybe you have one partner who you love traveling with and going on road trips with, and maybe there's someone else who you're really well suited to actually living in the same home with. I think that it's just important to recognize those differences.
I love that you're using the word connections, because we kind of started and I was using the word relationships, but I know what polyamory seems to be much more connected to, ironically, is the connection piece. It's, I have this connection to this person in this way. And I'm not bagging on typical relationships, as if there is such a thing as a typical relationship. But I love the word connection, because it says, this is how I'm connected to this person. This is how I like to be connected with them. And by giving yourself the permission to say, okay, I'm going to connect in this way with them, and this way with this person, and this, it's so much more freeing than I'm in this kind of relationship. Does that seem logical to you?
Right.
Yeah.
So, absolutely. And I think yes. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, man.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that, and I don't think that takes away from the need to, to sometimes make that connection explicit. I think it's still really important, even if it's not a relationship per se, to dialogue with this person and, just be open about what it is that you're looking for and what it is that you bring to each other's lives.
But I think you just hit on a key piece that's always in any book that you read about making relationships work and last and all this. It's about dialogue and communication. It's so important to be really clear on, okay, this is where we are. This is what we're doing. This is how this works for me. Does that work for you? And if not, then you have the dialogue back and forth until you find where this all comes together and enables you both to be in connection, relationship, whatever you want to call it, with one another. I'm curious, though, as someone who's, in polyamorous relationships, How do you, because I know as someone who's come out of the closet, we get bashed all the time because of, the gays we're the results of everything, we're the results of El Nino now, and we're, it's all about the gays, we're taking the world down. But I'm wondering, how do you address someone who says, oh, polyamorous people, they just, they don't know what they want. They just want to have free sex, free love. They whatever. How do you answer those kind of comments?
Honestly, I don't get those comments that much because I really do try to surround myself with supportive people. I definitely have gotten some angry tweets a few times, and I kind of just have to, just not really take it too seriously because I don't think that, they really have the full picture. And if it is someone who is, a close person in my life who really just doesn't understand, I just kind of, tell them the kinds of things that we've been talking about tonight. And I think that, if they actually met me or, had the chance to, see how I interact with the people I care about, I think that they would know that it's not just, some, attempt to, have everything and not, and not have a give and take. I definitely think.
I love that you just brought that up, Saul, because what you just said is exactly the same thing that many of my listeners who are struggling with the coming out piece, just understanding, they don't understand. They can't understand you, and that's where it comes from. And any of us as humans, when we don't understand something, one of the first places we go is to our own internal frustration because we want to understand. If we don't understand, it makes us look like an idiot or something. But being able to surround yourself with the right support and letting people, say their piece, but not taking it too seriously is truly, for those of you listening, no matter if you're gay, coming out, bisexual, transgender, starting to explore the poly world, whatever it is, learn to not take anything too seriously, because otherwise you will drive yourself crazy and you will make the journey so much harder. Mm. So I got one question for you here. If somebody's really curious about exploring this aspect, and I have this because I know there's polyamorous people in my community, in the gay and lesbian community. I know some heterosexual friends of mine that are in that world. But if somebody's really trying to wrap their head around it and starting to explore, want to explore, what would be some of the best advice you could give them in helping them start to find their way into that world?
Well, there's two things I would say. The first is to look at some of the really great books that have come out lately on the subject. More Than Two, Opening Up. They're just really great. They have stories from people who have been in this position before, and really great advice that applies to any kind of relationship. Mm-hmm. It's definitely a good place to start. Also, look for local meetups. Reach out to local poly groups. Chances are you're close enough to a city that has an event that you can go to, and these tend to be pretty casual. It's not like you have to go there and be ready to date someone right then and there. Right. A lot of these places are really welcoming. They're totally willing to answer questions for new people, and if it's not for you, it's not for you. But I think that getting to face-to-face time with people in your city who are in relationships like this is really helpful. I remember the first time I went to an event of this sort, that was when I was still living in LA, and just hearing 20 different people in the circle share their stories and say things that I had been feeling inside for so long. It was just like, wow, like there are people who have these perspectives. I'm not the only one. That was really helpful for me.
That's amazing. And I think those pieces of not being afraid to reach out, take the chances, is something we all face in so many areas of life, but especially when it comes to these sexuality, sexual orientation, relationship sort of things. We think that we're the only ones, that nobody will understand us. And the honest to God truth is there are so many other people out there just like you who are going through the same challenges, having the same questions, feeling the same desires. And you just got to be willing to open up and walk into those spaces and say, okay, I would like some support. I would like some help understanding. And they are out there and ready for you to go out and be supported. So one of the questions I always ask at the end of each of these podcasts, yes, we're already to the 30-minute timeline. It's amazing. But, for anyone who's struggling with really coming out to be themselves, to take that bold step, what would be a piece of advice you'd love to leave the listeners with who may be struggling with really stepping out to do something, whether it's be polyamorous or gay or whatever? What would be something you'd love to leave the listeners with, Saul?
I think it's really all about finding people who you can, open up to. I think that even if you find just one person who you can, embark on this journey with, even if it's a friend who isn't, into the same things you are, but who's willing to go to, your first event with you. I think that's where I would start, is just, finding one person who
Absolutely.
You can, share this with.
Absolutely. And just that one person, just knowing you have some quote-unquote comrade that you can turn to, you'll be amazed at how different you begin to feel in that one moment. So before we start to wrap things up here, Saul, what's the best way for someone to read some of the stuff you're doing? What's your website address again?
You can find me at multi.love. I just got that domain name, and I'm really excited about it. You can find my blogs there. You can find links to my ebooks. And you can also find me on Twitter at Saul of Hearts.
Awesome. It's awesome. And I just want to say thanks for being here, Saul. It's been great to have. Really, this is the first conversation. I look forward to having many more conversations like this around polyamory as this becomes a little bit more of the fabric of our society. So thanks so much for being here and sharing your wisdom with us through this last 30
absolutely.
minutes. Cool. And if you've been listening and you've found something that really struck a chord with you, you go, wow, I never thought of that, and you feel like it's been an inspiration, one of the things that makes these mediums of communication really powerful is when people share. So if you feel compelled to share this with someone, just hop on to whatever social media that really turns your crank and let people know that there is a show out here that's helping people not only come out in their sexual orientations, but come out to be who they really are, and really opening up to the possibilities of what it can be like when we're truly authentically ourselves. Give us a rating or a review on whatever podcast channel you're listening to this on, maybe Stitcher or iTunes, whatever it may be. Also, if you'd like to become more intimately part of the family, hop on over to Facebook and join me at The Coming Out Coach on Facebook. And you can always tweet out anything you want to about the shows you've heard with @RickClemens and the hashtag The Coming Out Lounge. And as I always say, as we wrap things up, the thing I always encourage each and every one of you beautiful human beings to do is to never stop going out there and stepping out, stepping up, and stepping in to living your powerful truth. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up. And just a quick reminder, if you're looking for some guidance, my book is coming out. It should be out by the time this podcast airs. Look for it. It's called Frankly, My Dear, I'm Gay. It's a late bloomer's guide to coming out. And it could even contain some tips for those of you who may be late in coming out to live your polyamorous life. Have a great week, everyone. You've been listening to The Coming Out Lounge with me, the host, Rick Clemens, the Coming Out Coach, and we will talk to you again in just another week.
You've just experienced the Coming Out Lounge. Go online to www.comingoutlounge.com to learn more, and tune in again next week for more stories and tips for being true to yourself.